everyone. I am calling the meeting to order. Welcome to the meeting number 59 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is meeting today to continue its study of the Quebec Electoral Boundary Commission report. Before I get into welcoming our guests, I just want to say a couple of housekeeping items. There was a letter circulated in regards to adding time to Procedure and House Affairs so that we can get through a little bit more work done. We will be allotting 15 minutes at the end of this meeting to that conversation. Therefore, the two panels will move quickly. And I will just say to the clerk that perhaps the second panel will be starting about 5 to 10 minutes earlier. So if we can just let them have a heads up, that way we can get through committee business really quickly. I'm also going to suggest that you do not have to use all of your time. And if you have extra time, you can send it back to committee so that we can get through everything very quickly, because I am confident our guests are going to be very efficient in providing us their information. Comme toujours, la greffier et moi.
As usual, the clerk and I will maintain a consolidated speaking list of members wishing to speak. For our first panel, we have with us Alexis Brunel-Duceppe, member for Lac-Saint-Jean, Marilyn Gill, for Manicouagan, and Mario Simard, the member for Jonquière, who's with us today over Zoom. We've done a sound test, and I understand that everything is well. So welcome. You each have 4 minutes for an opening statement, but you don't need to use all 4 if you don't wish to. And we'll begin with Mr. Brunel-Duceppe. Welcome. Good morning, and thank you for having us here for this important meeting. To tell you that it was a shock when we learned that the Commission was proposing to recreate the historic error of it setting up the riding of Jonquière-Alma. I will quote a letter that we received following the reception of this news, and I'll share with the committee. This recommendation that no one saw coming provoked an outcry amongst the population as well as among the elected members concerned. Why? Because this is not desirable. What is being proposed here will further complicate a situation that is already difficult. Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, you have to take into account our 2 separate entities, Saint-Jean and Lac-Saint-Jean, even though we're under the same heading. Each entity has its own communities of interest and county capitals. Alma is one here, even though personally I designate it as the capital of Lac-Saint-Jean. As well, wanting to include Alma with Jonquière will complicate a situation that will only result in making life more difficult for everyone concerned, the populations and as the member as well. And who do you think wrote this letter? I'll tell you, it's Jean-Pierre Blackburn, Canada's former ambassador to UNESCO, former minister, but above all, former MP for the riding of Jonquière-Alma. Mr. Blackburn was the one who represented this riding for the longest time, this short-lived riding that many have qualified as being a historic mistake. I'll quote you a passage from another letter we received. What was our surprise, indeed our astonishment to learn on February 1st that the Commission was now proposing to come back to this historic error of joining the city of Alma to the riding of Jonquière. And yet this was an error that we corrected not such a long time ago in 2013. Surprise, astonishment, but above all disbelief, because we use this as an example of a historic era, this Alma-Jonquière riding, in our brief. So going back to such a redistribution goes against all logic and was not in the proposals of the public hearings. End of the quote. This letter comes from the mayor of Alma, Sylvie Beaumont. She participated in the meetings of the hearings in September and opposed this proposal by the Commission. So without having been consulted on the proposal we have before us today, the riding of Jonquière-Alma was taken as an example not only by the city of Alma, but by many other stakeholders during the September hearings as an aberration in terms of political representation. And now, this might be the nail in the coffin, if we find ourselves with such a proposal at the Commission today, it's only because a citizen decided to table a brief. In this brief, There were several proposals for new riding maps for Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, including one that proposed to recreate the riding of Jonquière-Alma. And then I will therefore quote another passage from a letter we received following this news once again. Ladies and gentlemen, and I am Marc Perron, a citizen of Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. I am very disappointed to see the option that's been chosen, and I bitterly regret having proposed it. And I would like officially to withdraw this proposal. End of the quote. So the member who served this riding for the longest time is opposed to its recreation. The city of Alma, which is the most affected by it, doesn't want it recreated, and several stakeholders used this as an example of something that should never be recreated, as a former mistake. And finally, the proposal that the commissioners put before you today has been withdrawn by the person who tabled it. So I think that all members concerned agree that this should not be adopted. And knowing that the member for Chicoutimi-Lafieur, Richard Martel, supported the first proposal by the commissioners. So we regretfully support that initial proposal because we know that the recreation of Jonquière-Alma would be worse. Thank you. Ms. Gill. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the colleagues who are here today to hear me. My riding is Manicouagan, and up until now, and of course I'd like to talk to you about the name we wish to give back to it. It's not a question of redistribution in my case, but it goes beyond the symbolic, and I'll tell you why. First of all, a bit of history. Manicouagan was named this in 2015 at the moment of that redistribution, and it is one that covers the northern shore in Quebec, the administrative region, and the other is Charlevoix-Haute-Côte-Nord, which disappeared. In the 2015 redistribution, people who were elected said to me that it is one of the 6 MRCs that cover the North Shore, and it's also a river, and it's also a riding that lends itself to confusion because of the boundaries, because we call ourselves the North Shore. It's an administrative region. There's a ferry that you take, and you arrive on an island. And so we are North Shore people. So there's a question of our sense of belonging here. And this came from the 2015 redistribution that we change it to from Manicouagan at that point in time. So that was done by the Commission. But what I want to come to, it's my second point, and yes, it was done, but for the reasons of the boundaries and the sense of belonging, we'll change Manicouagan to Côte-Nord. And there was consultation done among the population at the time, and they agreed with it. The people agreed with it. So the Commission listened to that perspective, and we have now Côte-Nord, Manicouagan. What I would like to see, so that it be with an effort of consistency and respect, is to come to the issue of consultation, because in effect, now another name is being proposed, Manicouagan. The interpreter doesn't have the full name written down, but I'd like to recognize the goodwill of the commissioners to add indigenous names to the name of the riding. Manicouagan, despite its unknown origin, is a Jesuit word. It's not an indigenous name, even though it was indigenous in the beginning. But so I appreciate the goodwill, but where I see a problem is that people were not consulted. So yes, there is lots of goodwill, but I'm also the critic for Indigenous affairs, and the Indigenous people want to be consulted in these things. If we want them to be stakeholders and say that you're really participating in something, they want to be heard. And that's the name that we ourselves want to give the riding. Mitasinan, for people on the North Shore, corresponds to the territory. It's not exactly the same thing, but there's a superpose of territory, and so the people who are represent about 15% of the territory are represented by the name Manicouagan. So in terms of consistency, we don't want there to be any confusion. We want to say that there needs to be more consultation when we talk about UNDRIP and consulting Indigenous peoples, when we look at what should be done in the House of Commons as well for the implementation of such declarations. I think as an elected member myself and as a critic for this, I have to raise this whole issue of respect and belonging and consultation, because citizens, like all the others, are all equal, and they should feel like they are understood and represented in the new riding. And that is why we are humbly proposing Côte-Nord-Mitasinan as the new riding name. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to you, Ms. Gill. Mr. Simard? Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and hello, dear colleagues. I would like perhaps to come back to what my colleague from Lac-Saint-Jean was presenting to us a little while ago. I think that we have serious reasons to oppose the proposal of the Commission, and I would begin by indicating to you that there is a flagrant procedural unfairness here. The Commission talked about a proposal made in June 2022, the 29th of June, but never did they talk about joining the Jonquière to Alma in that initial proposal. And so if that proposal had been presented to the population, we would have had a much bigger outcry in the region than we would have to the initial proposal. So there are no communities of interest between Jonquière and Alma. And to the point that there's a Facebook page that says, I come from Saguenay and not from Lac-Saint-Jean. And there's another Facebook page that says, I come from Lac-Saint-Jean and not from Saguenay. So it's as if you compared someone from Montreal to Quebec City or somebody from Toronto to Montreal. They are two communities of interest that are fundamentally different that we are trying to unite. So earlier, my colleague from Lac-Saint-Jean spoke to you about the letter from the former member, Mr. Blackburn, who was the member of representing the riding of Jonquière-Alma, and he was in that position for the longest time. The riding existed from 2004 to 2015. Claude Patry, who was a Bloc Québécois MP, who I was an assistant to, had the map altered in 2013 at the request of the people in the region, business people in Alma and elected officials in Alma didn't want to be part of Jonquière-Alma as a riding anymore. And so in 2013, we said it was a historical error, this creation of the riding, and we said at the time that we must not recreate that mistake again. So I was astonished, as was the member for Lac-Saint-Jean, to see this proposed again. And apart from the well-intentioned comments by one citizen, Marc Perron, no one else asked for it, and he himself has asked to withdraw it now. So we have the support of our community, and if the riding of Jonquière-Alma was not presented to the people, I think that's quite a considerable procedural inequity, and I think that the proposal was already discussed. In 2013, it was discussed, and in the redistribution of 2013, several people spoke to say that they didn't want to know anything about the recreation of this riding, which made the work of the member and the socioeconomic participants and stakeholders untenable. And so we had corrected that historical error and now would be going back and recreating it again.
Will our proposal mean a domino effect on other ridings? Well, first, you have to remember that when the first proposal from the Commission was presented, myself and the member for Alma were both against it. The member for Chicoutimi had agreed to it. Now, what we are supposing with respect to Jonquière-Alma is that the best option, if you will, is to get back to the initial proposal, which is not perfect, but at least will not split the cultural center of this region, which is Alma, the economic center, which is Alma, to join it with another area, which is the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you very much.
Très vite, quelquefois.
4 minutes go by very quickly at PROC. So we'll move to questions and comments, and then we'll receive further information from everyone. Let's start with 6-minute rounds with Mr. Burke, and then Mr. Fergus, and Mr. Tenier, and then Madam Blaney.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Brunel Duceppe or Mr. Simard, or both. From what I'm gathering, I believe, the first proposal, which was the one you were challenging to some degree, but also challenged by some people within the riding, that's what led to the second proposal, which does not satisfy all of the parties. So what led to the commissioners exchanging that first proposal for the second? Did you indicate that it was fine from the start? Answer: I'm not quite clear on the question, but I think what you're asking is what led to the commissioners changing their minds. Is that essentially what you're saying? Yes. Well, people mobilized against the first proposal because some communities were being disconnected from the Lac-Saint-Jean area, would have ended up in Jonquière. Of course, it was never, no one ever said Jonquière-Alma, but how did they get to Jonquière-Alma as a proposal? Because a citizen showed up with that proposal, and that same individual, the commissioners based their work on and presenting this proposal, well, this very individual withdrew his proposal. So it was impossible for the commissioners to go ahead to get back to Jonquière-Alma because the proposal that they worked on was withdrawn. It's as though Mr. Perron had decided not to table that proposal in the first case. It is moot. And the reason why we are against Jonquière-Alma is because it was never the object of discussions. And as Mr. Simard said, but in 2016, it had been discussed. People had mobilized in this Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean area against the notion. And the commission corrected or rectified this historical error in 2013. How can it be that 10 years later, the very same commission would choose to recreate the very mistake that it had corrected in the first place? We need to do our homework. Unfortunately, now we have to get back to that first proposal because it can't be any worse than Jonquière-Alma. And the evidence is that Jonquière-Alma did not work. The 2013 commission decided to rectify that error. I think we need to show some consistency, especially when it comes to political representation. Mario may have something to add. Briefly, what happened is that the commission replied to the objections raised by members and the public by putting forward a proposal that was worse than the initial proposal, one that was never the subject of discussions with political stakeholders in the region. That proposal was, in essence, recreating the historical error. Today, all of the stakeholders, with former colleague of yours, Jean-Pierre Blackburn, saying that that situation is untenable. Then you have the individual himself who put forward the Jonquière-Alma proposal who is withdrawing it. Question. Thank you, Mr. Simard. I have a question that's, I think, important here. You're suggesting getting back to proposal one, but was there any option of something that would have been satisfying other than the first or second option that all parties would have been on board with? Go ahead, Mario. What we are criticizing here is that the Commission did not put forward to the public the Jonquière-Alma proposal. It's difficult for us to create some new proposal that the Commission would have had to study again. And we know very well that fundamental changes are difficult to achieve. So the most easily accessible solution for everyone, for the people in our region, for the commissioner's work, is to get back to that first proposal, which was not perfect, but at least less damaging to our region. Good?
Merci.
Very well. Mr. Gould? It was 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Mr. Fergus. Thank you very much to our witnesses, our colleagues from the House of Commons, for their presentations. Madam Gill, I have a few questions. Regarding the name of the riding, it seems to me that you polled the people in your riding, that you shared that information with us. How many people are in favor of changing the name and in favor of what you're suggesting? Côte-Nord, Natisinan. There are several aspects to your question. First of all, we send our householders out, as you know, and we showed the people in the riding the first proposal from the commissioner, then Côte-Nord Nitassinan, that had already been circulated in our riding. 1,800 people, or rather households, responded in a positive way to that. So that's what you all have before you. And then, of course, there's been a lot said about representation from the start. What I could add to that is that the Assemblée des Préfets of the North Shore, the elected representatives, are in agreement, and there are resolutions to that effect. So, again, I'm referring to the elected representatives, but also the chiefs. The chiefs, we received a letter for them, from them, the Innu chiefs, that are in favor of adding Natasinan. So I would say the representatives from the region, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, are supportive. Super. Second, can you tell us about the significance of this Indigenous name? Yes, Nitassinan. Of course, I am not a linguist. My Innu skills are limited, but Nitassinan means the territory, our land, the land. It's a powerful word when you know how closely connected Inuit and Métis are to the land. So this is significant to them. And beyond that, the land, the territory, it is huge. And it doesn't represent just one place. There are spots that are of importance, but we're using Natasinan is similar to using the word North Shore. It covers the whole area. Now I'm getting into something a bit more personal, but to have something on equal footing, these two lands on equal footing, and creating that link, I thought, was a good idea. Mr. Brunel-Duceppe, Mr. Simard, I know your region very well. I can imagine how Jonquière Alma was a highly controversial decision. I have a question that is similar to Mr. Gould's question in a way. The people in Alma do not want to be linked up with the whole Lac Saint-Jean area. Is there a third proposal that you could put forward? You just want to go back to the way things were and agree to that proposal, the initial proposal, despite all of its defects? Yeah, to answer your question, Alma does not want to have anything to do with the Saguenay. And one of the reasons why it does not is because the people in Alma know that their political weight will be diluted as soon as they join Jonquière, because then their political weight, it will mean they would be the smallest city in the riding, whereas currently Alma is the largest in terms of population in their region. Now, at this stage at PROC, it's not really the time. The time is not now to draw up new maps. There was an initial proposal. Yes, there was an outcry. Yes. But that outcry is far less than if we'd put forward Jonquière Alma. And now we have to remember that. The member from Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord sent a letter to the hearings supporting the initial proposal. My colleague from Jonquière and myself thought, okay, to avoid that historical error of recreating Jonquière Alma, we were prepared to agree to that first initial proposal from the commissioners, somewhat despite ourselves, but to avoid a worse catastrophe that had been rectified in the past. Given the member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord was supportive, given the fact that the three federal members from the region in this Lac Saint-Jean would be supportive of that first proposal, that would mean we would not be forced to revisit that historical era of Jonquière-Alma. I think you all are members. You know exactly what this means, these communities of interest. I think you yourselves are in a good position to avoid us recreating this mistake. I would hope that in the report you will indicate that that won't happen. And I think we are supported by a number of very credible stakeholders here. The member himself represented that very riding for the longest time in the House of Commons. I mean, that riding only lasted 10 years, but that very member writes you a letter as in your capacity as parliamentarians to say it's not a good idea. And we're asking you to do your work in a nonpartisan way. This is a conservative member.
Mr. Terrier.
Mr. Terrien. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to welcome the members who are here with us today. I myself lived in the Lac-Saint-Jean area. I lived in Saint-Félicien and Saint-Brim. I know the region well. And when I saw this proposal, I almost fell off my chair because I can't even begin to imagine that one would not respect the Lac-Saint-Jean area and its specificity, and then the Saguenay, which is very different in many regards, and to take the capital, Alma, from the Lac-Saint-Jean, in and put it into the Saguenay is really to show a lack of understanding of the region. Mr. Brunel-Duceppe, I'd like to understand what has been the reaction of people. I myself had a strong reaction. Imagine the people who live there. They weren't consulted. I'd like to hear what you have to say about the reaction of people out there in the riding. Thank you so much for your question. Indeed, on February 1st, my phone battery was constantly being discharged because everybody was calling me. Everybody was in a state of shock. There was a document we didn't have time to table before the committee, which is a resolution from Town Hall of Alma, and that came. It was past the deadline to table documents, but it is City Council for Alma that wrote this resolution. It's rather long. I'll read it quick. It's saying whereas, and the most important thing is that the Frédéric Tremblay, councillor, supported by Dominique Fortin, councillor, that we ask the Electoral Boundaries Commission for Quebec to ask that Alma, the largest city in the Lac-Saint-Jean area, remain within the Lac-Saint-Jean region. And this was passed unanimously by Town Hall. So this is City Council. So this is important to do our job as parliamentarians, to not let this one be swept under the rug, and it should be approved. We have to make sure that the mistake is not recreated. Mario? Yes, we have heard reactions from citizens and from elected representatives as well. A person would really have to have no idea about the Lac-Saint-Jean area if they wanted to join Alma and Jonquière. So I hear people say, why not put forward a third proposal? Well, because it would be a catastrophe. Why? Because it would be a mistake for the Commission not to listen to us in the context of a third proposal and go ahead with Jonquière-Alma.
And wanting to be certain and wanting to be absolutely certain that Jonquière-Alma's proposal doesn't go through, we'd like to go back to the original proposal, even if it's not ideal, knowing that initial one would have the support of the three members and would have the support of a good part of the population in our region, so in order to avoid a new Jonquière-Alma. I would have a question for the MP for Manicouagan. You talked about consultations earlier in your comments. Did you make any efforts to consult? I'd like to hear you on that. Yes, in fact, several times. But for the rest of the story, for most elected officials in Côte-Nord, that's the habit that we have. Everyone agrees without exception. Same thing with the Innu chiefs that we spoke to, and in fact, they're the ones who decide amongst themselves. But obviously, they agree. In terms of consultations, everyone was consulted with the means that we had to do so. And I'd like to emphasize that because I said earlier, the commissioner really has the best of intentions. and I know they want to add Indigenous items, but the Indigenous people were not consulted, and the chiefs weren't consulted. And that's what's important to me in the context of this commission. We want to work more closely with Indigenous populations, but it shouldn't be the other with a capital O that decides what to name our ridings. So they should be able to choose for themselves, and that, to me, was what should be done, and that's why I humbly put forward this proposal. All people were consulted. I have a question for either Mr. Brunel-Duceppe or Mr. Simard. We know that people relate to one communities, but is there any single community of Jonquière-Alma? Well, there is a community of interest if there is one rather, between Alma and Jonquière. I've never seen it. In 2013, it was clear that it's not the MP who asked for the map to be changed. It was the people who came to us to ask for that. Business people said they were poorly served by Jonquière-Alma because the member took more care of Jonquière than he did Alma, and he was less present at their activities, and that was throughout the whole mandate of Claude Patry. It was very difficult to reconcile the interests of those two separate communities, Jonquière and Alma. So it's a fracture that's quite clear. Somebody who comes from Lac-Saint-Jean doesn't consider himself as a person coming from the Saguenay, and for someone from outside the region, it might seem unimportant, but it's an identity point that's important in our region. So if we reunite those two communities, once again, there will be further distortions in their representation. It's clear. If I could add something, please. You have to remember, and I'm repeating myself, the 2013 Commission corrected the mistake. So 10 years later, do we want to reinstate that mistake? That would surprise me, because in 10 years' time from now, you'll have a commission that will recorrect the mistake again. And we can't, it's not a ping-pong game here. Thank you very much. Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank all the members that are here today and behaving so nicely. I just have one question, so I will be able to give you back some time, so hopefully that's helpful later on. And my one question is to Madame Gill. It seemed to me in the letter that I read from the Nation that they were hoping the Indigenous name would be first. And I don't know if you answered this already, but I'm just wondering, why is it not first? I think as the first people, that just makes sense. So if you could just help me understand that, I really would appreciate it.
In fact, to answer Ms. Blaney, it's somewhat like I didn't want to interfere in the process of the commission. I would like to let the people speak. So I don't know what the answer is to that. I think we'd have to ask questions. My colleague from Métis Matapédia, it might have been arbitrary. It was just an alphabetical choice. I don't know. So I don't want to propose something. I don't think it should come from me. But I just want to speak to you about what people have said to me. So I think you'd have to I talked about consistency and cohesion and respect. And so if there are changes that should be made in the order of the names, or these are not ideograms, and we don't all have the same ideas, but that might be another discussion that we could have. So I think it's not up to me to decide that, but I also noted that. Thank you very much. That's perfect. Thank you very much. So we'll have a second round very quickly for people who have any further questions. Let's begin with the Conservatives. Mr. Berthold. Madam Chair, thank you. I think Mr. Duceppe and Mr. Simard have well explained their points. I think we have everything we need to make a decision on that. Thank you very much. Ms. Romanato. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a very simple question for all three members before us, and thank you for your presentations. Have you spoken with your colleagues in the other political parties concerning your positions? And if so, do you have any answers from them? If I may, thank you for the question. We have the proof that Mr. Martel supported the initial proposal. He wrote a letter and tabled it in the September hearings of the Commission. So from that point in time, I think we didn't need to go and talk about preparing ourselves before coming here, because officially he'd already supported the initial proposal in September. And so that's fine with us. So Mario, you might be able to add something to that? Yes, just quickly, just to say that I indicated to Mr. Martel, the member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord, that we would come back to the initial proposal in order that we have an agreement between the members that are currently sitting, and he said that he accepted it. So now all three members have accepted the initial proposal, and I discussed that with Mr. Martel at the time. Ms. Gill? Yes, in fact, it's a little bit different. It's not a redistribution in my case, so it doesn't affect the ridings that are on my boundaries, but it's an issue of goodwill for the rest of Canada in terms of Indigenous names. And so all colleagues, I think, who have neighboring ridings to mine agree with the change, because it really it's up to the population. And on the territory of Côte-Nord-Nitassinan. And so I think the discussions had between the chiefs, of course, nation to nation, and I don't want to interfere in that. So I take what I'm told, and the Innu Nation agrees. That's all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Terrien. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm listening to this, and I find your position to be so clear. As I said, having already lived in the region, I can hear that everyone almost is in agreement with this, even though if I can't say every single person agrees. But I'd like to hear what the impact would be on the MRCs in particular, and I'd like to hear each of you speak to that. Okay, yes. Quickly, Alma is the biggest city in the MRC of Lac-Saint-Jean East. So Alma, being the biggest city in Lac-Saint-Jean Est, would find itself uprooted in a federal riding and sent over to Saguenay. So I think that it's just good common sense. What I just said to you, Mr. Terrien, it means that right away you can see that it's not logical to put Alma into that federal riding, because on the provincial level, they're in the Lac-Saint-Jean riding. So the only level of government where Alma would not be part of Lac-Saint-Jean would be at the federal level, because in terms of the MRCs and in terms of the provincial boundaries, they are part of Lac-Saint-Jean's territory. So I think as an elected member, as an MP, and as a Québécois, I think that everyone knows the difference between Saguenay and Lac-Saint-Jean. We love the people of the Saguenay, and I'm still with my friend from Jonquière, but that doesn't mean because we love them. We're not the same, that's right. So maybe, Mario, you could add to that. Well, just on the MRCs, the city of Saguenay is an MRC in and of itself. So the city of Saguenay would find itself with the biggest municipality of Lac-Saint-Jean East, and the MRC would find itself with Lac-Saint-Jean. So in terms of the MRC boundaries, it's worse than the first proposal that we can find in terms of a riding of Jonquière-Alma. It would become extremely difficult to have any kind of planning in terms of economic issues, social issues, so that these would all be consistent if we had that situation. Okay, I'm trying to sum up your position here. All three members agree with the proposal. The communities of interest are extremely distinct, and I'll take the time the others didn't take if I could. That would be fun. Okay. The communities of interest are clearly different. The population is behind you. The MRCs would find themselves in a bad situation if this was the case. So is there something that we haven't heard that's not in line with what you've said? Well, I would just find, no, sorry, Mr. Brunel-Dessep. When I speak, the others don't speak. I don't know how it works in other committees, but that's not the case here. So, your comments I gave you a few moments extra, but when you started asking questions, that doesn't work. So thank you for your summary. I think it was well done. Ms. Blaney.
I have no further questions.
That is excellent, and thank
Madame
you.
la
So what I'm
Présidente.
going to
Madame la
suggest,
Présidente.
Madam Chair, Mr. Berthold, just so it's clear, I heard my colleagues talk about the position of my colleague, Mr. Martel, concerning this proposal, and I just want to remind you that Mr. Martel didn't see any problem with the new proposal that was currently on the table. I think that in the media that was quite clear, and he said that he doesn't share the indignation on the new proposal. So just for the record, it's not because he's not here that he didn't take one position versus another. He just chose not to speak to the current issue. Madam Chair, I would have liked him to be present here so that he could explain to us why he's in agreement with the new proposal. And he's an elected member of this region. It's up to him to come and say why he agrees with this most recent proposal. I think it's a very strange way to to close the debate.
because there's a process. People get to have their say. Mr. Berthold used 7 seconds of his 5 minutes, so therefore made his point. Mr. Terrien's made his point. Mr. Brunel Duceppe, the committee welcomes any additional comments that you would like to share, as would be the case for Madame Gill and Mr. Sumar. You can send them to the clerk, and the clerk will have them shared with all members to consider as we do draft a report back. I am not going to get into a debate on this because the point is, as per the legislation, for PROC committee members to hear objections that MPs are raising, and then we report them back to the Commission, and rest assured that we will take that very seriously. And the insights that you have all provided, especially because these are your backyards, are really important to somebody like myself, because I'm not from that area. News.
So we appreciate everything that you have offered today. If you have anything further to share with us, please share them with the clerk, and she will then share it with the other members of the committee here. And on that note, I will wish you a good day, and we'll see you next time.
I'm going to say, because we have the second panel starting shortly, and there's just some scheduling changes, we're going to take the conversation we were going to have at the end of the second hour and start it now. And then we can pause it and continuing it after the second panel just to maximize our time. To set the stage for this conversation, if I may, I would like to say that at the end of last meeting, I was asked to work with the clerk to put forward a draft plan so that people had a better understanding of what was going to take place. We were in process of making that plan, and I have shared a draft with you, and stuff can move around as we want. Members are masters of their domain. And then a letter was sent to me as the chair to say we want additional time. And so I do want to say that not only was a letter shared with all of you, a motion was also put on notice, and there is a desire to see that conversation advance. And so this would be the time for us to have a sense of where members are at as to how can we get all of our work done. Because I actually do believe that we can. So with that, I'm going to, can I just go to Mr. Fergus first because he had his hand up first, and I'll come to Mr. Cooper right after? Is that okay? Because I do believe we can find a way forward. Mr. Fergus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it would seem to me that I think the issues which have been raised around the table, from what I understand, probably have wide support, that PROC should extend its meetings by an hour each. So rather than having 2-hour meetings, we could have 3-hour meetings twice a week to making sure that we get all the work done. In terms of foreign interference, in terms of the what we're doing in terms of electoral or découpage. So I think there's no objection here, And also Ms. Blaney's suggestion of calling in the Right Honourable David Johnson, I think is entirely appropriate as well. So why don't we just, I hope there's wide consensus for us to just move forward and make that the work plan going forward.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to move a motion that had been put on notice. It reads as follows. Members will have received copies. That the committee, in relation to its study of foreign interference in elections, beginning the week this motion is adopted, hold an additional meeting, at least 3 hours in length, during each House sitting week to accommodate the study, in addition to the regularly scheduled meetings of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mrs. Blaney?
Well,
Sorry, thank you for that. I always feel like I'm wrestling with the poor interpreters about who's supposed to push the button, so I apologize if I disrupt their work. I've had conversations with the Conservatives on this motion, and I am going to confess that I have a little bit of curiosity and openness to discuss having 3-hour meetings twice a week as opposed to 2. But I think the hours really matter. And so I guess for this particular motion, just to be respectful of the fact that we have many committees that are trying very hard sometimes to get extra time, and that can be a challenge, I just think it might be easier for this place to accommodate 2 hours as opposed to 3 hours. So I offer that as what I call a friendly amendment. I understand that's not an official title or official language, but I hope that Mr. Cooper will see that, and I do speak a little bit as a whip. I understand the hard decisions that whips have to make. And so I think 2 hours would allow us to move forward in a way that is more harmonious with the system that we have here in Ottawa, and love to hear feedback on that. And also appreciate Mr. Fergus's comments about having the special rapporteur come in. I do think that that is essential for the study, and I think it will help us understand the process that's continuing on, so we can talk about that later. But first, I'll leave it to the chair and my friendly amendment. And I'm moving this in as an amendment just to make sure that that's clear.
So first of all, you're offering it as a friendly amendment, or are you actually moving an amendment?
I'm offering it as a friendly amendment, but I will move it if it is not accepted, so.
Mr. Cooper?
thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Ms. Blaney is right. There have been discussions, and although we would, as Conservatives, like to see 3-hour meetings, I think it's reasonable to offer 2, and so therefore I treat it as a friendly amendment. Really, what we need is additional time to have at least 1 meeting a week to get answers with respect to serious revelations of foreign interference by Beijing, revelations that are coming to light, it seems like, every few days. And so it's important that this committee be able to do its work in terms of the issues that we must deal with respect to redistribution, but it's also important that issues around foreign interference are dealt with now and not pushed back weeks later because of that. And so this is, I think, a very reasonable motion in the circumstances.
Donc, sur la liste, j'en ai Mr. Fergus.
So on the list, I have Mr. Fergus, Madame Rominado, and then Mr. Boudreau.
I'm glad that Mr. Cooper had accepted that friendly change offered by Ms. Blaney. I'm going to ask him if he would also accept a friendly change. Rather than have an additional meeting that we have to find another spot in the hours of meetings that we have during the week, and we know that Ms. Blaney made a reference to this, how difficult it is to just carve out that extra time. Maybe it's just easier that we add an hour to our meetings, our regularly scheduled meetings, because we always have time to go a little bit over, and so I don't think we'd be pushing off other committees. That would probably be easier, and it comes to the same number of hours. And Mr. Cooper, just to make sure that you understand that the good faith nature of this, I think leave it to the chair to say, all right, we're going to do 2 hours of electoral redistribution, and 1 hour following that, 1 hour of foreign interference, or it could be the inverse. You could do 2 hours of foreign interference followed by 1 hour of redistribution, depending on how the panels work out, so that we can get both things done. It's the same 6 hours a week that he had just agreed to, and it's the same issues we could get distributed. And I want to make sure he understands there's no intention to push this off or to bring other things forward. It's just leave it to the subcommittee to determine the schedule, so that the committee can determine which is the right way to go forward. I think that's the least complex way forward, and we can get the work done.
Mr. Cooper, do you see that as a friendly amendment? No. Okay, so I just want members to know, when we did receive the letter, the clerk and I, signed by a majority of members on this, we did action that because that is a majority of the committee, and we did ask the House of Commons for not only resources for an extra meeting, and I've said that moving forward. So basically, we would like to be in the race for those extra slots moving forward, because that's the intention of the committee. And we've also asked for the extra hour at the beginning of each meeting, because if you look at the work plan that we're suggesting to you, sometimes instead of using 2 meetings from a report, it is that extra half hour or hour that could help us save a meeting. So I do think there might be an opportunity to actually do a little bit of it all, because we will also have to make sure we have witnesses appearing for those extra committees, and we can't mandate their schedule. So I do think that the concept of a little bit of flexibility should just be noted for the work that is done on this side of the room. So I'm going to continue with Madame Romanado, Madame Goudreau, I think Mr. Cooper is on the list again, and then Mrs. Blaney.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I believe actually our guests are outside, so I don't know if we want to take a pause or okay. So I just wanted to, because the procedural person in me wants to just reiterate, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment, because it takes out of the hands of the full committee the decision on whether or not something is acceptable or not, and the original question is before the full committee. Originally, the letter stated that to hold an additional 2-hour meeting, whereas Mr. Cooper's motion speaks to now additionally 3 hours in length. So I'm not sure what changed between the time that he submitted the letter jointly signed by the members of the opposition to say that they would like a 2-hour meeting, and then proposes a motion with a 3-hour meeting, which Ms. Blaney comes back with the 2-hour original. And I like the idea that Mr. Fergus brought forward in terms of resources available at the house. In the House, we know we're going to be going into intensive session, coming back after the break, and we have a lot of work to do on every committee. So if there's a way that we can maximize our time and our efficiency in terms of adding on and perhaps an extra hour to each of our meetings every week, I think that would not impact the full committee schedule of all the other committees that are meeting, as well as the House. So I agree. I think the total hours are the same, and I just think it's in a question of just making sure that we can not bump other committees. Thank you.
Madame Goudreau.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente.
Good day, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to be here with you. I really have a concern. One, I want to make sure that we're efficient in our work. We don't know, we have to also respect some timelines. But that said, of course, if we look at the hours available for any additional committee, that's why we're having this discussion today. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, Madam Clerk, there would be 2 options. Only 2, really, because I have this concern, and I think it's exactly what Madame Romanado just mentioned. this concern is that other committees are also, other committees are important, and our committee is important as well. And we have the advantage of having some leeway because we can receive this support. You know my position now. I'm in favor of this, but not to the detriment of others.
Mr. Cooper.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the comments of Madame Goudreau, and would note that with respect to House resources, that resources are available on Monday evening, Friday morning, and Friday afternoon. So it's not a resource issue to schedule a standalone additional 2-hour meeting per week. And with respect to the work plan that has been put forward that proposes an additional hour with respect to currently scheduled meetings, then I think that should also be considered if we needed additional time in addition to a 2-hour standalone meeting to deal with issues of foreign interference or redistribution. But it's not a resource issue. But this motion does not impact House resources.
I think, Mr. Cooper, what I find fascinating with yourself, and I'm going to say it today, is that conversation and discussion is okay as long as you're having it. But when other people are also just throwing it out, that's what we're doing here. Hence why we're having this conversation. I will also say to you that this is now a repetitive instance where you suggest there are resources, and the people who are here to provide me support as the clerk, and I will give a shout out to Sophia, who is the head clerk today, and she's accompanied with Christine. Both of them had the same reaction to be like, whoa, where's this information coming from? So I think as you are obtaining information, and if you're receiving it from the table, it'd be really good for the people who work really hard to keep this committee on its tracks to know this. And once again, I'm going to repeat. I received a letter, and the first thing I did was respond to the clerk and say, can we find out what resources are available? And I actually went beyond what was asked in that letter, and I said, can we even just start our meetings earlier to make sure we can accommodate this request? Because it's really important work that we're doing. So I'm not sure how much more I can demonstrate that when members want extra time, and the intention is clear that the majority of members are asking for that, that I take this role very seriously. With that, Madame Blaney.
Well, thank you for that, Chair. And, I know that we're going to have to get on to our next panel here fairly soon, and I appreciate that we had extra time to talk about this, and we'll have at the end. But I guess, I said it and I'll say it again. I'm willing to explore the idea of adding an extra hour per committee. I'm willing to explore that because I think one of the things that is really important to me is that we continue to do what we can to build trust. There's definitely a fear around this table about losing one way or the other. And I think that what would help me understand and feel more faith in the process, because I agree with Mr. Cooper, quite frankly. It's disheartening to me to open up online and see so many newspaper articles exposing yet another thing, and to feel like the transparency is not there. And I understand, again, we can go into the whole complex conversation about national security, but it just feels, it's hard. And then I have to go back and talk to my constituents. So I feel a real obligation to get some of this work done. Everybody knows how I feel about a public inquiry. So my recommendation is that I think that we need the subcommittee meeting where we look at the options and make a plan. And if there's a plan that all of us can get behind, or the majority of us can get behind, that really allows us to continue to look at foreign interference, I think there's going to be an ability for us to test the waters and then decide if we have faith after that. And I think, to me, that I really, again, I'm a planner by nature. Anyone who knows me will tell you that. I think, I appreciate the hard work that went into this plan, but there's some gaps in this plan that I think should be addressed. And I think if we could build something that we can agree, and maybe then we can at least take a period of time to check it out to see if it works with that extra hour. Because I do recognize, and I get asked all the time about committees extending time. It's not very easy, and there is a lot of frustrations. And we have to honor not our political world, but the people who actually do the work to make these committees happen. So I want us all to be really careful because we're asking people to do more work. And there's challenges to that we're still working through on that level. So I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you. So I do have a list that continues. We will come back. We will go through this panel fairly quickly, and then we will do this work because it's also important work, and then return to this conversation as we had planned before the end of the second hour. So with that, pour notre deuxième panel.
For our second panel, we have with us today Mr. Alexandre Boulris, Rosemont Lapitrie, Andrew Dillon, the member for Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle, Soraya Martinez-Ferrada, member for Hochelaga, the Honorable David Lametti, the MP for LaSalle et Mar-Verdun, and the Honorable Mark Miller, MP for Ville-Marie Sud-Ouest Île-des-Sœurs. So, welcome to all of you. You have up to 4 minutes for your comments. And if you don't want to use the full 4 minutes, that's not a problem. So, with that, we'll begin with Mr. Boulris. Welcome. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome, everyone, dear colleagues. Feels a bit odd to be here as a witness before you at a parliamentary committee. It's a first for me, and I hope I'll do it well. Very quickly, there are important things that I want to put on the table here because we were quite surprised in a bad way by the final report on redistribution in Montreal. You know, you might think that Montreal is one big city, but in fact, it's an amalgam of neighborhoods that have their distinctive characteristics and histories. And now we can see a redistribution that seems artificial to us and that it's breaking up the kind of organic neighborhood life that we have and creates artificial boundaries that are going to create a great deal of confusion. The two examples that I'm putting forward today are those of the Plateau, Montreal with Laurier, and Saint-Laurier-Sainte-Anne. So to take one part of the Plateau Mont-Royal and put it into the Outremont riding, whereas we're adding on to Laurier-Sainte-Marie, part of Old Montreal, you just created something artificial that people aren't going to recognize themselves in. People who live in Petite Laurier will consider that they live in Outremont. And as we've just broken up Saint-Henri, that neighborhood, well, it's not true that people in Saint-Henri will consider themselves to be part of Westmount. That doesn't exist. And so for us, my office and for myself, we discussed with other federal riding offices, provincial officials, municipal officials, and people all have the same concerns. In terms of Plateau Montréal, in a single day, we collected 200 signatures of people who were against the redistribution. And, of course, all of the elected officials of the Southwest signed a letter opposing and very clearly and officially this new distribution. So for us, it breaks up our neighborhood life and people's identities. It'll create a great deal of confusion. And I think that with the current boundaries, we can respect the demographic evolution of Montreal and the ridings that were there, and avoid this artificial patchwork. We were really surprised because it didn't correspond to what people said during the public consultations, and I think that we should stay with the status quo. However, before concluding, I would like to say that I agree with the proposal that my colleague from Hochelaga made to change the name of the riding, because there's a part of Rosemont that's in Hochelaga, and that creates confusion for people as well. So I think that a name change would help the situation, help clarify things. Thank you very much. Ms. Dillon.
The whole committee for having us here for today. I have a situation that's also overlapping with Minister Lametti's riding. So we both have LaSalle in our riding name. Removing it from my riding, Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle, would be absolutely unacceptable. It makes no sense whatsoever. Half of the population of my riding, of Dorval-Lachine-LaSalle, lives in LaSalle. of that population, more than half of it is ethnically diverse, whether they're visible minorities, so religious, different religions, ethnic backgrounds, languages. They will not see themselves represented at the federal level. This will be very harmful. I was born and raised in LaSalle myself. I'm here as an MP, and I don't see myself right now with that removal of the word LaSalle from the riding. I will not see myself in that riding representation. So I can just imagine what other people who have less of a voice than I do will feel. It will be denying their existence, that they are part of the riding, that they're part of the federal landscape. My population in LaSalle, that is contained within the boundary of Dorval, Lachine, LaSalle, is approximately 60,000 people. Minister Lametti has about 17,000 people in his section of LaSalle that is contained in the electoral boundary of LaSalle, Verdun. The other thing is there is already confusion, much confusion between our offices. Constituents reach out to Minister Lametti's office as well. With the removal of the word LaSalle, his staff is going to be so overburdened when people think he represents all of LaSalle. And already, if 65,000 people start calling your office, or at least half of them need help, we're going to have a big problem. So there's an overlapping problem. I'm not speaking for you, Mr. Minister Lametti, but it's a huge issue. So these are some of the things we have to keep in mind. Dorval and Lachine added together is the amount of people that are in the part of LaSalle that are in my part of the riding. So this is something that is very, very important to look at. It makes no sense to remove the word LaSalle. And like I said, it will deny the existence of half of the population of the riding and deny the existence of all those visible minorities and ethnic, religious minorities that exist in the riding. That's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Madame Martinez-Ferreira.
Merci. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's the first time for me as well to appear before a committee as a witness. So following the representations that we made in terms of consultations before the Commission, the February report means that the commissioners have consolidated the people of Rosemont East into Hochelaga. But they didn't consider a change of name with any kind of consultation in the reports. As my colleague said, since 1988, Rosemont's been part of Hochelaga, but 50% of the territory is not represented in its name. So there is indeed a great deal of confusion, as my colleague from Rosemont, La Petite Patrie, said. So I'd like to quote a few examples in the rest of the country, because it's always somewhat what the arguments are, that people don't want to repeat names. But there's Edmonton Centre, Edmonton Manning, Edmonton Wilpwood. There's Burnaby North, Burnaby South, Winnipeg Centre, Winnipeg North. And I think that the respect of the identity is also a reference to the people that are being represented. And for us, that's extremely important. As a good student that I was at school, actually that's not true, I wasn't a good student at all, but anyway, I would like to go through some of the questions that you sent to us and answer them in a structured way. So you asked why we would be opposed, and as I said, the reason is the name of Hochelaga. It would be important to the citizens to have Rosemont East included in the name of the riding. It benefits from the support of the community, particularly the Francophones of Rosemont, which represents all of the community organizations in the area, and also the mayor of the arrondissement of Rosemont La Petite Patrie, M. François Limoges. So there aren't demographic considerations. The commissioners have already made a decision on the limits and have said so in their riding. There isn't any effect on the neighboring ridings. And there are no arguments other than that which I have presented before the Commission, but there was no response to and no contrary or no argument against. So I think it's not just a boundary, it's a question of identity in terms of the name. 15% of the territory, as I said, is not represented in its name, and once again, the confusion with the citizens of the neighboring riding that my colleague represents. So I think a lot of people supported us in this, and including the neighboring MP. And it's not a partisan issue. It's just to ensure that all of the territory are also represented in the name of the riding. And that is what I wanted to say. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you to you, Minister Lametti. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, dear colleagues. I support Ms. Dillon's proposal in terms of the name La Salle above all, because we share La Salle, but this represents the reality on the ground, it's the case in Edmonton and other cases of Canada where we share a name. So I support her proposal entirely. For me, it's rather to put the name Aymar back into La Salle Aymar Verdun, which was taken away in the Commission's report. Villemar is an important part of my riding in terms of percentage, and a high percentage of my voters live there, but it's also a distinct area. So historically, it's distinct with an industrial history that's not really the case in Verdun and not even in La Salle. So it's an immigration story that is distinct, particularly with the Italian population, but others as well. And also, it's a bit of an enclave.
It's an enclave created by the Lachine Canal, by the aqueduct in Montreal, as well as by major highways. So it's always been physically distinct as well from the other three parts of the riding. I have the support, as you will have noted in my letter, from the Arrondissement du Sud-Ouest, and in particular Mayor Benoit Doré, who also outlines the historic and distinct difference that Villemart has always had from other parts of the Southwest, including Verdun, as well as la mairesse de Verdun, Marie-André Mauger. I note that it was part of the name of the riding from 1988 to 2015, when it was La Salle Aymard. And I note in 2015, there was an attempt to remove Aymard from the name. At that point, the charge was led by an NDP member of Parliament, Hélène Leblanc, to reinsert Villemart, to reinsert Aymard back in the name, and I'm trying to do the same thing. Briefly, it represents the reality. There are three distinct parts of the riding. People see the three distinct parts of the riding, and they understand the three distinct parts of the riding. It's not confusing, it's not too long, and it should stay. Merci.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today in terms of the proposed boundaries proposed in the Commission's report for my riding, Ville-Marie, le Sud-Ouest, and Île-des-Sœurs. In particular, as my MP colleague said, Mr. Boulris, I want to challenge the northern boundary for Saint-Henri. The position of the highway with Ville-Marie, we know it cuts the historic riding in two. And this history of the riding goes back to before the beginning of Canada. It's recognized in the literature and music of Quebec. Saint-Henri is part of the history, the industrialization, and has always maintained its distinct character. So the addition or the cutting of this into two separate ones would make it difficult and more confusing to access services and federal programs for community organizations.
Residents
Un seul député à l'Assemblée nationale au niveau
are represented by one administration at the municipal area, region, level rather, and one sole member. Saint-Henri has been a part of a number of federal ridings for at least 40 years. It fits within one entire riding. The northern boundary, Notre-Dame, would divide the community in an economic sense. The effect would be reduce turnout at elections as well. Westmount has a different municipal government than the city of Montreal at this point, and the northern part of Saint-Henri would be a completely different and distinct municipality. The request not to modify the northern boundary is supported by Mayor Doré and clerks. They received a letter indicating the objection. Saint-Henri is a community that has a strong identity and it is unique. It should be maintained, and residents should have easy access to services and federal programs. Although the northern boundary being maintained will increase the number of people in the riding, which is an important fact for the people around the table here. The other sections in the riding would be below the average. I know that my riding during the reference period, it has a 35% growth over the reference period. We have to make some sacrifices. I'd like to say that I did an intellectual exercise in looking at that northern part and adding that section. The people that vote in that northern part do not vote Liberal in general compared to the rest of my riding. So I am doing this in a nonpartisan sense, and I will leave it up to you to guess who they vote for. Conservative, said someone, and they said, no, I can guarantee it's not conservative. I'll let you guess that one, but it's not a partisan effort here. This is really an effort to maintain the integrity of Saint-Henri. Thank you. Very well done, all members. Let's start with the 6-minute rounds. Mr. Butchell, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank my colleagues for attending here today. We, as a Conservative caucus, the Montreal region have, of course, studied the changes proposed by the Commission very closely, and we've come up with a few results. We are not opposed to the various requests for name changes. I think that is up to the members who are really in the best position to determine the name of their riding. But I come from a rural region, and I myself will be seated where you are today on Thursday. 14 municipalities will be added to my riding in other administrative regions for me to simply say, let's not change anything. Let's keep the status quo. Let's make no changes at all. That just doesn't make any sense because the population of Quebec is changing. I'm wondering, what would you propose in terms of the map of Montreal to respect the mandate of the Commission, which is, you're dealing with many members in various parts of the country will have to make sacrifices. Some ridings will be broadened. Some ridings in some communities that have nothing to do with one another will be brought together. If we just say, okay, hands off, let's do nothing here, it's difficult to reconcile that. I think commissioners will have a hard time with that as well. Thank you for your question. That's a good question. It's a central question. Let's be frank. How we view this is that in the island of Montreal, there's one riding that, where there's been an increase in the demographic weight of the region, and that has had a domino effect on a number of other ridings. Of course, these other ridings would be fine, could keep going as is, but I'm talking about Montreal. I can't speak for your particular ridings or the regions or rural areas that I haven't looked at in terms of the changes that have happened there. But in Montreal, there have been a number of adverse effects. We change one riding and it has knock-on effects elsewhere. The demographic weight of Montreal for the rest of Quebec is the same as in 2012. So Montreal versus the regions has stayed the same. The number of ridings has stayed the same. The current situation is manageable. The second thing is that I don't think the notion of number is the only one. It's also the issue of communities of interest in the Act that is not really being upheld here, and that's the issue. The people from the Plateau Montréal who will never say that they are part of Outremont. If you tell them that, they'd be very surprised. It'll be a very big source of confusion for the federal members, and that's something we really wanted to make clear. Mr. Miller, did you have anything to add to that? Yes, it's an important issue. Montreal is a city that is in evolution. There are many ridings, and to be nonpartisan, I have no partisan interest in the comments that I'm making today. I just want to understand. I understand that your reality is very different than mine in terms of who you represent and the issues and distances, meaning that you have a different perspective than we do, because 100 meters don't make much of a difference in some ridings, but in our riding, as Alexandre was saying, on communities of interest, it has a huge effect. I saw the revised list drafted by the Commission. I lose Old Montreal and the Old Port, despite myself. I am prepared to accept that because there's a community of interest there. Okay. Given the 35% increase in the population of my riding during this reference period, sacrifices will have to be made, but it has to be done advisedly. The first proposal was Ville-Marie, the center of Montreal. You know, that whole issue made no sense, and the Commission decided to revise its decision. Then they cut Saint-Henri in half, which doesn't suit anyone. It makes no sense either. And then within the frameworks, that 25%, it fits. I'm prepared to make some sacrifices. I will be losing some voters. I'm prepared to do that for the regions you've set out. There's another aspect also. It's very different. The center of Montreal there's a high turnover. There are many people move on July 1st. Accessibility is not just geography related. It's also communications related. Where do we go to vote? Where are the ballot boxes? It's not like back in the day where people would just go to the neighborhood church to vote. You have to look at the map. It's very confusing. So there's an issue of integrity of these communities, and maintaining some consistency is very important in these ridings. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Romanado.
Madame Rominado.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank my colleagues for being here today. To follow up on my colleague, Mr. Bochold's questioning, he said he agreed with all the name changes. I hope he'll agree with all the changes for name changes suggested for other provinces. That'll simplify things for us. Now, on the issue of name changes.
Something about the fact that they were removing LaSalle from your riding. And I read the report with great interest. And it does say that the Commission decided to modify slightly the names of both electoral districts and removing LaSalle from your riding. And the argument was, we don't want to confuse people because it's in Minister Lametti's riding. My riding is a perfect example. Longueuil-Charlemagne, and we have Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. So there's an inconsistency, with all due respect to the Commission, about the name changes, because it doesn't make sense then why is Madame Ferrada's riding not include Rosemont in hers, at Rosemont Est, I think it is. So I'm in agreement with your suggestions. I think the question of identity is an important one in Quebec, and removing LaSalle from your riding name, people after 10 years, they know which riding they're in, and you don't need to remove their name. And I agree with you, Madame Ferreira, that it is important. Je vais laisser la reste de mon temps.
I'll hand over the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Fergus, who had a few questions as well. Thank you very much for your comments today. Thank you to everyone. I fully agree with what you've put forward. If I may, I'd like to focus on Ville-Marie, which really is an area that I know very well. As you said, Minister, it is physically separated and historically significant, just like Saint-Henri in your riding. Mr. Miller, considering, personally at least, Ferguses came from the Caribbean, settled there. A number of black communities settled in Saint-Henri. This is a historic part of the region for many diverse communities who live there. The idea of splitting Saint-Henri in half would really split that community of interest in two. I'd like to hear the comments, very brief, from both of you as to the importance of maintaining these communities of interest in your writings. Thank you for the question. Briefly, yes, I fully concur. A number of waves of immigration have come through. Community organizations, churches, parishes, industrial tradition, steel, all of that happens in Villemar. There are links to immigration. Why? Because immigration, Italian immigration, Italians settled there to work in these factories and in these steel factories. So that's really important. Physically distinct, and also in people's perception of their own identity versus the other parts of Montreal. People are proud to be from Villemar. And I also quote Mario Lemieux, who is one of our best-known residents. Very good question. Historically, the grievance Saint-Henri had versus, Saint-Henri Westmount, that was the writing of my youth, there was a major economic disparity between Saint-Henri and Westmount, and they didn't feel as represented, if you will, by the MP because of those disparities. And in the new writing that was drawn up in 2015, there's this nice link and a closer nexus between Pointe-Saint-Charles and Saint-Henri. And when you're talking about the black community that settled there, the historical black Anglophone community that settled there, and in Saint-Henri, you maintain that dynamic that is quite beautiful. And they're used to seeing one MP rather than, be told, okay, you have to go there. Go talk to this a national hero, of course, Marc Garneau. I'm sure he could have served them very well, but I think it just leads to confusion. There's also the more recently established Bangladeshi community, strongly Muslim representative, and they need representation. The writing office has to serve people because of these immigration aspects and other issues. And it would be very unfortunate to have this community divided simply for the purposes of statistics. I think there's a human side to all of this. And for that reference period, considering everything else in terms of all of these other issues, it'd be important to maintain that balance. Do I have any time left, Madam Chair? No. Not this time, maybe next time. Madame Boudreau. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first off, I'd like to welcome you. Our colleagues clearly have a very good understanding of their writings, as you know. 12 minutes in, plus the question and answer session, you have mostly raised all of your arguments. There might be a couple of points that I might like to dig into a little deeper. Now, first off, at procedure and House Affairs, who am I? Of course, in the 1990s, in the years 2000, I lived in Petite Patrie and Annecy. I know that things have changed. I don't recognize Montreal. I don't know Montreal anymore, so I have to rely on your knowledge of your writings. And
Question, en fait, parce qu'au comité, je reviens là, au comité de la...
At the procedure committee, we are gathering the information, and the goal here is that you give us the most documentation in support. in order to follow up on the Commission's report, and we hope they're listening to us now and that they might make the necessary corrections. So the first question would be, Madam Chair, to Mr. Boulris. Am I mistaken, or in the documents, in the opening comments, you talked about 200 signatures in support, but I didn't see that in the documents. So for the benefit of the commissioners and our report, is it something that you can share with us? Thank you very much for the question. And indeed, we will send all of this documentation to you. So the letter from the Arrondissement of the Southwest, the support from citizens who wrote to us, and the signatories of that petition. 200 people in one day shows the concern that people have on many levels. And we'll send all of these necessary documents to the clerk. It also shows that people were surprised. They were caught short by this. It was a bad surprise. And there is a lack of popular support, of citizen support, for this redistribution, because people don't see themselves in their identity, in their riding. And indeed, it's an excellent question. Thank you very much. We'll send you that. Well, we're here to help you, because otherwise the only thing I can look at is figures from the last election. So not that I don't want to consider that, but when I look at the big picture, I want to see other things as well. So to be able to do proper analysis. There's also the fact that when you table the document in terms of the people who are opposing this, we saw with people who came and met with us that sometimes there were diverse opinions. Some people were opposed to some things that could change after consultation. So the question I have for you is, would it be possible, to the benefit of our commissioners, that you're all here today? Often I hear them say, that's fine. You want us to keep the community's interest. You don't want to divvy up these arrondissements. And just to say that sometimes I saw small municipalities cut in two. So is it possible, because the report hasn't been drafted yet, that there could be a common effort made here? And here is what we're prepared to negotiate. Because the commissioners, first of all, they have to respect the quotient, and they have to keep this. And I've heard Mark Mello speak to this. We don't know how about demographic movements always, but things can change a lot. So I'd like to hear you on this. Would this be something that you could do to help? Because in the end, you want the changes you want to make. You want to keep your ridings and your communities of interest. So what can we do to help our commissioners so that they can really listen to you but also act as a result of all of this? So, Marc, I'd like to hear you on this first, please. Well, I spoke to Mr. Boulris perhaps 2 or 3 times about the issues and what I wanted to propose. And I think we were on the same wavelength. You know, we talked about the old port and the changes I was prepared to accept in order to remain within the standards that the Commission has to respect. In terms of my other colleagues, I know that Mr. Garneau signed my letter of support for Saint-Henri. I found it as a little bold on my part to say something that my colleagues might be prepared to accept for their writings, but I might make a small suggestion in terms of Mr. Guibault's writing. He would be prepared to serve the people of the old Port of Montreal. And he would do that very well. But you're quite right. I mean, all members from Montreal and from the various ridings in Montreal, we should say, yes, we say what we want for our constituents, and that's the spirit in which I came here today. But I think that the broad lines that have been drawn are something that could be recognized. So I don't know if Mr. Boulris wanted to say something about the part that I would lose, despite my best efforts. But if you want to keep everything, I'd be ready, because I love them all. But that's the way it is. Okay, second round? Okay, thank you.
Everyone for being here to talk about these important issues. Mr. Bulleries, if I could start with you first. It's a surprise to us all. Could you explain how the redistribution impacts community representation in the ridings in question? You mentioned that there were discrepancies. I'm just wondering if you could explain that a little bit more.
Somewhat as my colleagues explained, these are historical neighborhoods who really have a distinct identity with their organizations. The people who live there have a real sense of belonging, and I think it's important to respect that sense of belonging. The people who live in Outremont are proud to live there. That's a name that's recognized. The Plateau Montréal is the same thing. There's a pride in that. So now there's going to be some confusion because people who obviously live on the historic Plateau de Montréal find themselves in another riding, and it's going to create a lot of confusion. Also, in terms of the process, when there were public consultations, nobody proposed what is in the final report of the commissioners. So this is a redistribution that was completely unexpected, and now it's as though the people find themselves faced with a fait accompli. They're concerned, they're not happy, and I think that that's why it's my responsibility as a member for Montreal to come and express ourselves here and reflect the concerns of our constituents. We have the impression that it's a complete surprise, this box, and at the end of the process, boom, we just see they're going to almost change the identity of the neighborhood. Is there some way of changing things and having some flexibility here? Of course, nothing's written in stone here, but we want to make sure that things are livable and that if there are small changes that can be made, perhaps we could do that and maintain the living city that we have. But at the same time, what we have facing us here today is going to break up that neighborhood life. It's going to sow a great deal of confusion, and we don't see the need for it.
And so I guess what I'm just trying to get clarity is it sounds like you're just asking for the status quo. Is that what you're asking, and can you explain why you think that's the best way to move forward?
Well, there are several ridings on the island of Montreal, and there's really one riding where there's been a significant increase demographically, and obviously we could see that there should be some changes made there. But now it's as though there's kind of a knock-on effect on Outremont and Laurier-Sainte-Marie and so on, whereas those ridings shouldn't be touched in such a way. The impact is much too significant in terms of the numerical significance of the demographic change at the beginning. So, I mean, I think for us, it's not up to me to start redrawing the map, but the results of this change are too significant for us not to say anything. People don't want this change. They're very concerned. They came to see us from every level of government and amongst our constituents as well. That's why we're here today to say that has to be redone. It doesn't make sense.
Thank you for that. So I guess I'll just continue on to Ms. Dillon, unless there's anything, of course, Mr. Bulleries would like to add. Can you just talk about if you feel that the proposed changes to the boundaries or the riding names on the island of Montreal are confusing for citizens and voters? And maybe I'll just ask that of all of you as I've got 2.5 minutes left.
Thank you for your question. They can be confusing. They don't make sense in a lot of cases, but especially as I explained with my writing, and I'm not going to take up too much time to give the chance to my colleagues, but especially in my writing, it's a question of identity and denying the existence of these different identities who live together, who work together, who see themselves represented, who see themselves as part of society, as part of the population. And like I've mentioned, adding Dorval and Lachine brings us to the same amount of people that live solely in LaSalle. So keeping LaSalle in the title, Dorval, Lachine, LaSalle, is very important, not just in terms of electoral representation, but in terms of identity, in terms of humanity, in terms of letting people feel. And especially we know with the statistics we've seen, with everything that we've seen coming out, that these communities already don't have much of a voice. And to just wipe out that existence, that name, is very hurtful too. So thank you so much. I'll pass it to my colleague.
Just quickly to your question, and I want to support my colleague Boulris on his request. When we presented to the commission the impact on our writing, they were actually giving a part of Stephen Guilbeault's writing to my writing, which is there's a CN rail separating both of the writings. And we went to the commission saying, well, did you look at this other options? Because what you're looking for is that representation in terms of numbers. You can actually do both, consolidate the writing neighborhoods and not giving me another totally, completely neighborhood. So I think the commission for the island of Montreal went too hard and too strong on the domino effect on the other writings. And I think in my colleague Miller's writing, for instance, which is the biggest one in Montreal, I think we could have other options without having an impact so big on other writings.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Donc, on continue.
We'll continue with our second round, beginning with Mr. Berthold, followed by Mr. Turnbull and Mr. Boto. Thank you very much, Madam Chagger. After consultation with the Conservative members, we got all of the answers that we needed for today. So thank you, Madam Chair. I thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Oh mon, c'est Monsieur Berthold.
Mr. Berthold, that's very good. Ms. Romanato.
That comment.
It's actually
Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the members for being here today and for your testimony and voicing the concerns that you have within this process. I appreciate that. And Minister Miller, maybe I'll ask you just a couple of short questions in relation to what the objection that you're raising, which I think is to sort of preserve the integrity of the community of interests in your riding. And I just wondered if you had any community support for that, and if any of the other members of ridings that are adjacent, that would be impacted, have also shown any support for what you've proposed today.
Thank you, MB Turnbull. And I think I just want to take a step back and say we should be really honest to each other. I don't think the people that vote for us go around saying, I'm a proud resident of insert the riding name Vimy or of Ville-Marie. And we say it in part, we're kind of like off our communication sometimes when we're saying as a proud MP for this thing that anyone outside that, unless they're a keen observer of federal politics, have never referenced. I am an MP for downtown Montreal. However, the names can't be so off kilter or importantly misleading. And I don't have the legal test for this, but I think in the case of my colleagues, it seems like residents at election time, which can be quite stressful, would be misled, and I think that is worth due consideration. And let's also be clear that those boundaries that are put are inherently artificial, but they can't be hideous. And I think in the case of decisions that just look, visually, and for the communities that are affected that look that way, that also plays into the matter of confusion, and then people not being able to get out to the ballot box wherever it happens to be situated. And heaven knows in Montreal those ballot boxes move quickly. So I think that looking at that reference point is important for this team's consideration. I have spoken to Marc Garneau, and he was supportive of this and signed the application that I submitted. And I have briefly talked to Minister Guilbeault and told him about that addition. He seemed he seemed positive as well. So that in terms of the support is. At the federal level is what I've seen, and I understand that MP Boulris is supporting at least the portion with respect to St. Henry. I don't think there's a single person that wants to see St. Henry split into Mayor Doré of the borough has written a letter to that effect. The local councillors have supported it as well, and we could absolutely provide written documentation if required. Some of it is already in your hands, but more if need be.
Ryan, could I also add with respect to that riding?
Please, Mr. Lametti, I was going to extend that to you as well. If you like.
My riding is contiguous with Mark's riding, as well as in a small way former Minister Garneau's riding. And what it would what the current situation simplifies is the ability of municipal politicians to deal with only 2 MPs. They have Minister Miller for the Saint-Anne part of their municipal boundary, and then they have St. Paul Villemard, which is mine. And so they're dealing with only 2 MPs. You're going to add a 3rd MP for a very small portion. It unnecessarily complicates it, and you can understand why Maire Doré and the rest of the municipal government of that particular part of arrondissement in Montreal clearly don't want this to happen.
Very compelling, and thank you, Madam Chair. I think my time is up, but appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Madame Goudreau.
Ben, je vais le prendre, mon 2 minutes.
I will take that 2.5 minutes. And I wanted to say that we really understand that domino effect on Montreal. And I would hope that will be clearly indicated to the benefit of commissioners. And I'd like to offer an answer. It's, if it's all well and good to say we don't agree with this, with that, if we put forward some proposal, we heard Mr. Miller and his colleagues, is this something that could be improved? That's my only question. Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, it can be improved. As I said, it might not be our job to draw up lines on a map, if you will, but there is room for some flexibility. The proposal that Mr. Miller put forward with respect to the downtown region of Montreal, splitting Saint-Henri in half makes no sense. There are some things that really matter in the points that we've raised today to defend the people in our ridings. There's also the issue of process. Between the initial proposals, the public consultations, and in the final report, it's a surprise. How could we end up at the end of the day with that? It's not in the first proposal. It's not in the other proposals that were put forward by the people consulted. It's almost as though it came out of a hat. There's a lack of transparency. And now people are saying, we have the feeling that we are facing a fait accompli, and no one really asked for that. And that might explain what happened in other ridings as well, people who have come to testify before us and said these things. So thank you for your clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Very well. I thought you said you were going to take your full 2.5 minutes, and you're leaving me with 35 seconds. What an excellent gift. Madam Blaney.
Wow, this is very exciting. Everybody's working together to get it done. So I just leave the same question that I asked, if you need me to repeat it, to Minister Lametti and Minister Miller. I will repeat myself. So I'm just curious, do you feel that the proposed changes to the boundaries or the riding names on the island of Montreal are confusing for citizens and voters?
I don't think they are. In fact, I think we're lowering the confusion level by maintaining what we currently have. People have now, over 10 years, almost 10 years, come to understand what the riding names are. There's a slight boundary change between Madam Dillon and myself. We're not opposing that. That's fine. But people generally understand, and we work together. It allows us to work together, and municipal administrations understand which MP they're going to, and I think that's helpful. Again, my point was just there's a difference in attitude. Verdun, Villemard are both arrondissement of Montreal. They're both on the metro. LaSalle's the beginning of the suburbs in a way. It's more car oriented and off that part of public transit, and so there's a difference, and people understand it, and I think we serve our constituents well, and I think the current names help us to do that.
There you go.
I wouldn't have said anything different. So.
Excellent. I am done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I just want to say, Josh Oliverio is joining us here from the Waterloo region, and he's a young person who has a podcast on political decision making and youth. And it was really interesting for him to be able to see this discourse take place as to how politics also functions aside from sometimes what makes on the headlines. So just the tone of the conversation and the important work we're doing with redistribution, I think, is an experience that he will enjoy. And so I'm really grateful to all of you for the work today. Really want to give an appreciation to Mr. Boulris, Madame Dillon, Madame Martinez-Ferrada, Minister Lametti, and Minister Miller on behalf of PROC members. If you have anything else to add, please send it to the clerk and it will be circulated around. With that, we wish you a great day. PROC members, we're going to continue our earlier conversation with the motion. Yes, take care. Thank you. And so I'm going to we'll keep quiet just to maximize our time. I do have a speaking, well, I don't really have a list, but I have Mrs. Romanado, who is the person on my list, and Mr. Cooper to follow. Show me a hand if you need it. Mrs. Romanado.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'd like to move an amendment to Mr. Cooper's motion. And sorry, I drafted it, so I drafted it in English, and I'll do the English and then the French, but please.
Do you have it in both official languages?
I have it written. I don't have an email that I can send you, but I will read it slowly. And I will read the English and then the French. Is that okay, Madam Chair? I know.
You don't have to ask for permission.
So I just want to confirm, sorry. I actually understand that Mrs. Blaney had a friendly amendment. Mr. Cooper accepted it. I understand Mr. Fergus.
Yes.
So I understand that Mr. Cooper moved a motion. Mrs. Blaney offered a friendly amendment to change from 3 hours to 2 hours. Mr. Cooper accepted that. Then I understand that Mr. Fergus offered a friendly amendment to have instead of 2 hours to 1 hour, 1 hour. Mr. Cooper did not accept that, but you did not move an amendment. So there is currently no amendment on. Sorry, there was just confusion saying that we already have an amendment, which we do not. We have a motion that has a friendly amendment on the floor, and now Mrs. Romanado is offering an amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. What I'd like to propose is that the committee, in relation to its study on foreign interference in elections, beginning the week this motion is adopted, hold an additional hour to regularly scheduled meetings at least 3 hours in length during each House sitting week to accommodate this study. So the intent is that the request from Mr. Cooper was to add an additional 2 hours every week, every sitting week to this study. I'm proposing 2 hours every week to this study. I'm just prescribing it to add it to the currently scheduled meetings that we have. And the rationale to that is, as you all know, we are going into the end of the session. We have a lot of legislation that comes in. We have a lot of issues that every committee is going to want to finish before the end of June. I do not want to take up all the leftover available spots every week, because that really, I'm not saying our work is not important, but all of the work that the House does is important. So to minimize impact, my suggestion is we add an additional hour to all of our current scheduled meetings. I think that is something that can be accommodated. We get the 2 hours that Mr. Cooper's asking for, which is great. And we also make sure that we're not impacting the rest of the committees. And Madam Chair, I know how competent you are in terms of scheduling, and I leave it to the chair, who is responsible for the agenda, to then schedule our meetings accordingly based on the will of the committee to see witnesses and so on. So that is my proposal.
So I have an amendment on the floor. Mr. Cooper's on my list. Did you want to speak to the amendment? Yeah. Mr. Cooper.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate what Ms. Romanado's submission. However, I believe that we do need a standalone meetings. I think it works better from a scheduling standpoint. It's cleaner. And I just want to confirm, based upon my previous submission, that my whip's office had conferred with the head clerk. And in the normal course, there are 2 slots that are available, one on Tuesday evening and another Friday afternoon. Those were slots that had been previously designated to the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying. There's also another slot, which is Thursday evening, that is mostly available, but would not be available when the Board of Internal Economy meets on Thursday, resulting in a canceled meeting, or at another point of the week, resulting in the need to move that committee to that Thursday evening slot. So, again, I just underscore, based upon the information I have, there are the resources to have a standalone meeting.
So I'll just say I take information from the clerk and the analysts, and when they tell that to me, I will believe them, and I have confidence that they know how to obtain resources. I try not to meddle in their work in that sense. But thank you for that clarification, Mr. Cooper. Mrs. Blaney.
Well, I'm torn by this. I think, again, I will talk about the fact that we would need to put together a schedule that made sense. I think we have to ask questions like, if we extend by an hour twice a week, do we want committee meetings to be focused for the 3 hours on one subject? Are we okay with mixing those? I think the committee needs to have a little bit more say on that for me to be open to this discussion. And I guess the other part that would be helpful for me is to understand from the clerk, what is easier? Is it easier for us to extend twice a week by an hour? Is it easier to get resources? Will the resources be more reliable? I heard what Mr. Cooper said, and I understand quite clearly what he's saying, but I guess I just want to have a better awareness. Is it easier to extend by an hour, or is it the same amount of complexity to have an extra hour that's 2 hour, or an extra meeting that's 2 hours long? Because we're making some assumptions here, and I want to know, clearly, is one way easier? I have to be honest, in my life, for scheduling, an extra hour twice a week would be easier for me just personally to put in my schedule. But I think that we do have to have a discussion about how we would schedule and what would work. If we were going to move in that direction, what would make it feel more accessible or friendly to members of the opposition? Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Mrs. Blaney. Mrs. Blaney, do you have a preference as to if we would keep it by theme? So would you prefer it not be mixing from one to the other, or would you want it to be the buffet?
Well, I would prefer it not to be mixed. I think it's a lot easier if we just have the time exclusively for one subject. But I also recognize that if there's a time that, we have a witness that can only make it on this, I would prioritize the issue over the discrepancy of whether or not to have 3 hours fulsomely on one subject or another. I hope that makes sense. But I do think I would like the clarity of knowing that we are there just to work on that issue. And I think, again, it comes back to this issue that has been brought up, is that what I think the opposition feels, and I'm speaking as one member of one party in opposition, is that we don't want to feel like we're being tossed around. We want to know that there's accountability, and that we don't want to see this study on foreign interference sort of be pushed to the back when it's something that is incredibly important. And so there needs to be a little bit of support for us, for me anyways, to have faith that will be the case.
Before I go to Mr. Fergus, I do want to try to get this to a vote. I do want to just say, Mrs. Blaney, what I actually do believe, based on also the work the analysts do to support the committee, it would be better to be on one study or another study, unless there's an exception, and then do what we've done in the past, because if it's scheduling, to see where members are at, if that's an adjustment. But I do think, and that's why even in the draft, with reports, it wasn't just about foreign election interference and extra time, really about how can we get that work done, maximize the time, and then be able to have more functional meetings. I have Mr. Fergus, followed by Mr. Cooper.
I'm wondering, Madam Chair, if it would be helpful to my colleague Mrs. Blaney, if we make a clear preference that the priority would be foreign interference, and then subject to the subcommittee booking witnesses, in recognition that that would be the priority, and it should be a unit, and our preference is for a single issue meeting. But if the situation arises where either there are not enough witnesses, let's not make perfection the enemy of the good, or good the enemy of, no.
You were
Right. I've had perfection the enemy of the good, and then allow for some flexibility from the chair and the subcommittee to determine what the agenda would be.
And before I go to Mr. Cooper, I think that's what I think is what would allow us to have more functional meetings, is by saying, is the 1 hour added going to be a benefit for us to get through the work, or would it be better to have a standalone 2-hour meeting based on witnesses and so forth? And I feel like that's where it'd be nice if we could actually get it to a spot of or instead of, at a spot of and instead of or. So based on what is needed, be able to do it with the intention of having the extra time every week to get through this work. Mr. Cooper?
Thank you very much. And I would only, and I get your point about and versus or, but again, to emphasize why I think it makes more sense to proceed with a standalone meeting is that when we, upon passing this motion, then we know that those resources are guaranteed. When we request an extra hour, or generally we understand that when we request an extra hour, it's a request. It's not guaranteed. And second of all, generally speaking, having a 2-hour committee meeting as opposed to adding an extra hour at the end of our 2 meetings, from a witness scheduling standpoint, I think actually provides more flexibility, not less.
Miriam Goudreau?
So what I understand is that, first of all, we need those 2 extra hours. Second, we seem to have the resources. Earlier I mentioned about Tuesday night, that's possible. Thursday, that's less ideal. But having said that, depending upon the witnesses, I understand that the first choice, I think it is to have a separate meeting. Second choice would be, according to the available resources of the House and witnesses, I think from 10 to 1 would be the best thing. And I think perhaps we've gone around the table. Perhaps my colleague wants to intervene again. Thank you, Ms. Goudreau. Mr. Berthaud. It's just that the importance of adding a third meeting is that it allows you, Madam Chair, to have some choice in the week that follows. If witnesses are available at various times, that gives 3 windows of opportunity to get the people that we wish to hear from on this study on foreign interference. So I think it's important to proceed as you said. It's easier. And the ultimate solution would be to say 1 extra hour per meeting. But once again, I don't think it's the best solution. So I would hold with the initial proposal, but I understand that some latitude could be involved here. I think we should try and nail down 2 extra hours. And if that doesn't work, we could decide at that point in time. Madam Chair, you have the opportunity to speak regularly with all parties involved, and we could proceed that way. Thank you, Mr. Berthaud.
To make sure on the record it's noted that our regular meetings that take place on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 to 1, I have full intention of having foreign election interference be part of those regular meetings as well. And therefore, depending on who's coming and their availability, it might be worthwhile being able to have a 3-hour meeting, or it might not be. If we're looking at a redistribution report, it'd be nice to have the window. For me, as the chair, working with the clerk and the analyst, we're trying to manage all of the things to satisfy the intentions of what committee's asking. But nowhere in my world is that this additional meeting is the only spot where foreign election interference would happen. Foreign election interference was asked to be on the front burner. I have kept it on the front burner. I would like to also satisfy our legislative request because there is a law in front of us and we are lawmakers, so we should look at that legislation. So how do we get it all done? And I actually do believe we can. Mrs. Blaney.
All right. Well, this is an interesting conversation. So the first thing that I'll say is again, I did ask this, and maybe we can't get it now, but I need clarity on that. Is it easier to add an hour, or is it the same difficulty? I'm just trying to understand that. That would be helpful for me in my decision-making process. And the other part that would be helpful for me to have clarity is if we do this motion and accept the amendment and have a vote, and the amendment is selected for the extra hour, then that means we have an extra hour. Just like if we voted to have an extra meeting, we would have an extra meeting, because there seems to be, this isn't just sort of a kind of gentle recommendation. This would be a motion from the committee adding an hour to each meeting in a week, resulting in 2 extra hours of committee for PROC. Those things would help me. Thank you.
So basically, because there is a couple of extra slots, if we can get those slots, then obviously you would take the slot because the House functions in slots. But at the end of the day, whatever the committee asks, the House is going to do whatever they can to accommodate that ask, because that's what we do. And that's where having a little bit of a game plan as to what we want to do, providing us a little bit of flexibility, because the motion also does say at least. So could it be that in 1 week we have 4 extra hours based on availability, and the next week we don't have 2 hours? And that's where we just want some flexibility to be able to say we want to understand what the committee wants, and we will do whatever we can to deliver it. And I think that's where I'm not hearing anyone who is opposing the extra time. I'm not hearing anyone opposing the desire to do all of the things, including keeping foreign election interference as the priority focus. And I think that's where we're just trying to get to it. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I'm going to call the question on the amendment. On Mrs. Romanato's amendment. Clerk.
Mr. Fergus.
En faveur.
Ms. Taylor-Roy.
En faveur.
Ms. Romanato.
En faveur?
Ms. Sahota.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Oh, yes.
Monsieur Berthold.
Oh, no.
Monsieur Gould. No. Mr. Cooper.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Madame Gaudreau.
Je sais même pas sur quoi je vote. Je suis tout mélangé. C'est pas correct, hein, mais
I don't even know what I'm voting on. I'm all mixed up. No.
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The amendment passes. Now on the main motion as amended, on Mr. Cooper's motion as amended.
Could we just have the motion read? Est-ce qu'on peut avoir la motion?
Could we read the motion, please?
That the committee, in relation to its study of foreign interference in elections, beginning the week this motion is adopted, add an additional hour to its regularly scheduled meetings during each House sitting week to accommodate this study.
Question.
We'll have the question on the main motion. Mr. Fergus,
Too late.
as amended.
As amended, je vote en faveur. Merci.
Ms. Taylor-Roy,
Yes.
Ms. Romanato,
Yes.
Ms. Sahota,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Monsieur Berthold,
A little yes.
Monsieur Gould, Mr. Cooper,
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Madame Gaudreau?
Bien oui.
Ms. Blaney?
I so want to say no, but I'm going to say yes.
Yeas pour 11, nays contre 0.
So the motion does pass. So I'm just going to take 30 more seconds before the next committee sets up, just to say, I hear what members are asking for. We are going to get the Miriam is not here this week, and when she returns, we're going to get a consolidated list of all of the witnesses who have been invited, those who have already come, and those who are yet to come. Also information as to when they were invited and if they have responded or not responded. We did have 2 panels on foreign election interference, which had confirmed, and then we postponed them. So we'll look at kind of what their availability is and then adjust perhaps the redistribution stuff around it so we get to the right number of hours and meetings on that. I see your hand, Mr. Cooper and Mrs. Blaney, but I just want to let you know. And then based on this motion, the intention of it for me is the added hours. So where we need to do what the House has, either a standalone or 1 hour, 1 hour. I understand that it was past 1 hour, 1 hour, but there will be times where we will need to do a standalone meeting based on who can come. So I am going to take that leniency for the chair and the clerk and analysts, that based on what the intention is what we will be advancing. And this week, though we will not be able to secure witnesses and probably have the extra meeting, I will ensure that these 2 hours that should have been in this meeting are in another week. Also, for the record, during the 2 constituency weeks, we know that Ms. Telford will be appearing. We are doing our best to have a date confirmed to you by the end of this week so that we can plan accordingly. I also have heard back from Minister Mendicino's office that it is the second week we return where he is trying to come. As we know, he was at the funeral yesterday and there's been a lot going on and it's important that the government be represented, but he has been in communication with the committee to secure a time for him to come, and we will make sure everyone's invited and responded, and we'll keep you in the loop. Mr. Cooper?
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. There is one matter that I do want to raise. It's the 3rd time that I have raised it, and that is with respect to the consolidated response. It was on March 1st that the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor had committed to provide responses to questions that had been put respecting dates in which the Prime Minister and PMO staff had been briefed about Beijing's election interference. On March 2nd, the director of CSIS committed to working with the PCO to provide a consolidated response, including the dates on which the Prime Minister, ministers, PMO staff, ministerial staff, and senior Liberal Party staff were briefed about Beijing's election interference. Respectfully, these were questions that the witnesses could reasonably have anticipated. They're not complicated. They require checking the calendars of those individuals with whom the question was put with respect to when they were briefed. And given that it has been nearly a month, let me say that this is really unacceptable, especially given the fact that we are going to be hearing from the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff within the next couple of weeks. It's imperative that we have that consolidated response within a reasonable time before Ms. Telford appears. I would submit that the time that has lapsed has not been reasonable. These are straightforward. This is a straightforward undertaking, and I would certainly hope that the Prime Minister's office isn't obstructing the work of this committee once again with respect to providing this information that the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor had undertaken to this committee to provide.
Mrs. Blaney?
I just wanted to add that I hope that one of the meetings that we have soon is set aside for a little bit more planning. Now that we know that there's going to be the 3-hour-long meetings, I think it would behoove us. Again, what you've given us today as a draft is a good start, but I think it would be helpful for us to maybe take an hour of one of those days that we sit to do that work. Thanks.
Noted. With that, meeting adjourned. Have a great day.